In March of 1976, two refrigerated vans pulled through the security gates of Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. Inside them, packed across both trailers, sat 5.5 tons of supercomputer. The machine that emerged over the following days looks like nothing the laboratory had ever received. It was not a row of cabinets. It was not a wall of blinking lights. It was a tower, 6 feet tall and nearly 9 feet in diameter, curved into a shape that resembled the letter C and wrapped at its base in a ring of padded vinyl benches. The benches were not decorative. Underneath the cushions ran power supplies and the plumbing of a Freon-based cooling system that consumed enough electricity to power 10 homes. Visitors who sat on those benches were, without knowing it, resting on the most expensive piece of furniture in the United States. The computer inside could perform 160 million calculations per second. That was 10 times faster than anything else on Earth. It came from a company with fewer than 100 employees, headquartered in a town of 13,000 people in northwest Wisconsin. And its designer had once told a visiting French scientist that elves helped him solve problems while he dug tunnels under his house. The machine was the Cray 1. The town was Chippewa Falls. And the man who built it would spend the rest of his life chasing the next fastest machine, until speed itself was not enough. You're watching Tech District, where we take apart the companies that built the electronic world, down to the circuit board and the engineer who designed it. If that's your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because the rise here is just as strange as the fall. Seymour Roger Cray was born on September 28, 1925, in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. His father was a civil engineer with the city, and young Seymour inherited both the precision and the restlessness. By the time he was 10, he was disassembling radios and rebuilding them. In high school, he won a science prize for building an automatic telegraph machine that converted electrical signals to Morse code. Classmates later recalled that when the physics teacher was absent, Cray taught the lesson himself. The war came and he enlisted, serving first as a radio operator in Europe and then transferring to the Pacific Theater, where he worked on breaking Japanese military codes. The work was monotonous, exhausting, and formative. It taught him that the real bottleneck in intelligence was not human cleverness, but computational speed. After the war, he enrolled at the University of Minnesota and earned a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering in 1950, followed by a master's in applied mathematics in 1951. The combination was unusual. Most engineers of that era chose one discipline. Cray wanted both, because the machines he intended to build would require both. His first job was at Engineering Research Associates in St. Paul, Minnesota, a company founded in 1946 by William Norris and a team of former naval cryptographers who had spent the war breaking the German Enigma cipher. ERA's mission was to continue building the kind of machines that had won the code-breaking war, and it quickly became one of the leading digital computer companies in the country. ERA built some of the earliest commercial digital computers in America, including the ERA 1103, the first commercially successful scientific computer released in 1953. Cray contributed to its design, and in doing so, learned a principle that would guide the rest of his career. The machines that mattered were the ones that solved problems faster than human beings could pose them. When Sperry Rand absorbed ERA through a series of corporate mergers in the mid-1950s, the bureaucracy multiplied and the freedom contracted. Norris grew frustrated. In 1957, Norris left to found Control Data Corporation, and Seymour Cray went with him. The world of fast machines and everything that would follow from it started in that departure. At Control Data Corporation, Cray was given freedom that most engineers never see. He designed the CDC 1604, one of the first fully transistorized computers, delivered in 1960. Then, he designed the CDC 6600 in 1964, a machine widely considered the first true supercomputer. It could perform 3 million calculations per second, and it did so through an architecture of radical simplicity. Where other designers stacked complexity, Cray stripped it away. The 6600 made control data a serious competitor to IBM. He followed it with the CDC 7600, 10 times faster still, which held the title of fastest computer in the world into the early 70s. Both machines were built in a laboratory Cray insisted on placing in Chippewa Falls, far from Control Data's Minneapolis headquarters, because he did not want to be interrupted. Both machines nearly bankrupted Control Data during development, and both made the company enormous amounts of money after delivery. But the pattern was unsustainable. Cray wanted to begin design on the CDC 8600, a machine that would essentially bolt 4 7600 processors together. Control Data's management, already stretched thin from the financial strain of previous projects, decided in 1972 to phase out development of large-scale scientific computers. The split was amicable. William Norris invested $300,000 of Control Data's money as startup capital. Seymour Cray walked across the property in Chippewa Falls, set up a new laboratory only yards from the old CDC lab, and founded Cray Research. Lester Davis, the man who had served as a senior engineer alongside Cray at Control Data, came with him. Davis would become the chief engineer on the Cray 1 and would guide every major machine Cray Research ever built. The business offices went to Minneapolis, but the real work happened in Wisconsin. For 4 years, the small team in Chippewa Falls worked without a product and without revenue. At first, the concept of building another supercomputer from scratch seemed impossible. The CDC 8600 had failed. Seymour's old engineering partner, Jim Thornton, had gone in a different direction at Control Data with the CDC Star 100, a vector processing machine that disappointed customers because it ran slowly on anything except perfectly structured data. The approach had been right, but the execution had been wrong. Seymour wanted to do it better, and he wanted to do it his way, which meant starting from a clean sheet of paper. He worked at night. He worked alone. He despised committees. The story everyone tells is that Seymour Cray dug a tunnel under his house in Chippewa Falls and claimed that elves visited him underground and helped him solve design problems. The documented record is thinner, and honesty requires a flag here. The tale appears to trace back to John Rollwagon, the CEO of Cray Research, who told it to visitors and journalists to build a persona around the company's reclusive founder. A former Cray Research employee who worked there from 1984 to 1996 has said that the story is largely a fabrication, based on some excavation work that contractors performed on Seymour's basement. The Computer History Museum describes his diversions more carefully, noting that they included digging tunnels under his house, and once burning a sailboat he had built because he had built a new one. What is not disputed is the result. By 1975, the design was ready, and the company's chief technology officer had traveled to Wall Street and found a line of investors willing to back a machine that did not yet exist. The single most important design decision in the Cray 1 was not the processor speed or the memory size. It was the choice to build a vector processor that kept its data in registers instead of pulling it from main memory. Previous vector machines, including the CDC Star 100, had suffered because main memory was too slow to feed the processor. Seymour realized that if you gave the processor a massive bank of fast registers and let it perform all operations there, you could bypass the bottleneck entirely. The machine would be fast, not because any one component was extraordinary, but because nothing in the system was slow. The shape followed from the engineering. The C-shaped tower was not aesthetics, it was wire management. Over 60 miles of internal wiring connected the logic and memory boards, and no single wire was longer than 3 feet, because even at the speed of light, signal delay across a longer wire would cost precious nanoseconds. The round tower minimized the distance between any 2 points. Densely packed integrated circuits from Fairchild and Motorola, all emitter-coupled logic running at 80 megahertz, generated so much heat that a built-in Freon refrigeration system was required to keep the machine running. The power draw was 115 kilowatts. And the bench, the famous bench that circled the base like a piece of living room furniture, concealed every bit of it. Power supplies, cooling lines, and wiring harnesses, all hidden beneath cushioned vinyl so that the machine looked, from the outside, like something you might find in the lobby of a science fiction film set. The Cray one ran at 160 megaflops. Nothing else came close. The Cold War was the engine that made Cray Research possible. Nuclear weapons laboratories needed to simulate detonations without actually detonating anything. And those simulations required more computational power than any existing machine could provide. Weather prediction demanded it too. Climate modeling, atmospheric research, and oceanographic analysis all pushed the boundaries of what any single computer could calculate. When the Cray one was announced in 1975, the excitement was immediate. Los Alamos National Laboratory and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, the two premier weapons research facilities in the United States, entered a bidding war for the first unit. The rivalry between the two labs was so intense that it actually delayed the purchasing process. To break the deadlock, Cray Research shipped serial number 001 to Los Alamos on March 4, 1976, for a free 6-month trial. The National Center for Atmospheric Research became the first paying customer in 1977, writing a check for $886 million, $7.9 million for the machine, and nearly $1 million for the disk drives. The company had expected to sell perhaps a dozen Cray one systems and had priced them accordingly. They sold over 80, at prices ranging from $5 million to $8 million each. The machine made Seymour Cray famous. By the early 1980s, Cray had become synonymous with supercomputer in the same way that Xerox had once meant photocopier. Government laboratories, intelligence agencies, oil exploration companies, aerospace firms, and research universities all wanted one. But competition was arriving. In Japan, Fujitsu, NEC, and Hitachi were building their own vector supercomputers, drawing heavily on the architectural principles that Cray had pioneered, often at lower cost and with aggressive government backing. The Japanese machines were good. By the late 1980s, they were very good. The American response was to push harder on speed and to cultivate the institutional relationships that kept Cray machines in every major national laboratory. By 1995, Cray Research reported $676 million in revenue and employed 4,840 people. Revenue in the late 1980s had derived approximately 75% from system sales, with the rest from leasing and service fees. But Seymour Cray was not the only person designing Cray supercomputers, and the machines that kept the company profitable through the 1980s did not carry his fingerprints. The Cray one had made the name. What followed was built by others. Steve Chen was born in Taiwan in 1944. He earned a doctorate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and joined Cray Research as a design engineer. In 1982, he delivered the Cray XMP, the company's first shared memory parallel vector processor. It looked almost identical to the Cray one on the outside, the same horseshoe shape, the same bench, but inside it was a different machine. Chen's design housed 2, and later 4, processors running at 105 megahertz, each one faster than the Cray one, and all of them sharing a common memory pool. A 4-processor XMP delivered 800 megaflops and cost $15 million. It was the fastest computer in the world from 1983 to 1985. In 1985, Bell Labs purchased a Cray XMP for $10.5 million and received $1.5 million in trade-in credit for their old Cray one. The special effects for the 1984 film The Last Starfighter were rendered on a Cray XMP. Tom Clancy used the machine as a plot device in The Hunt for Red October. Chen followed the XMP with the Cray YMP in 1988, which expanded the design to 8 processors and became another commercial success. Behind all of it was Lester Davis. Davis had answered a newspaper ad for an electronics technician after leaving the service. taken a chance on a small company, and ended up at the center of the most important supercomputer engineering effort of the 20th century. He was the quiet chief engineer who had been with Seymour since the control data days, the man who turned Cray's architectural visions into deliverable, functioning products. Davis guided the technical integration on every one of these machines, from the Cray 1 through the XMP, the YMP, and the Triton, before retiring at the end of 1994. A young conveyor engineer named Lou Saye once visited Cray Research unannounced, just hoping to see the lab. Davis spent 90 minutes with him, explaining the inner workings of supercomputers. Saye was so impressed that he moved his family to Chippewa Falls without the promise of a job. John Rollwagon, who served as CEO, said it plainly years later. There would be no Cray Research without Les Davis. Davis still lives in Chippewa Falls. Neither he nor Chen became famous. Seymour Cray's name was on the building. While Chen and Davis were building the machines that paid the bills, Seymour Cray was pursuing his own successor to the Cray 1. The Cray 2 took 9 years to develop. Released in 1985, it was smaller than the Cray 1, but 12 times faster, running at 1.9 gigaflops. It could compute in 1 second what would have taken ENIAC, the wartime computer, several months. Its most striking feature was not the speed, but the cooling. The Cray 2's circuit boards were immersed in a tank of fluorinert, a non-conductive liquid manufactured by 3M. The coolant flowed under pressure through stacks of densely packed modules, absorbing heat and carrying it to external exchangers. The machine looks like a piece of laboratory equipment from a future that had not yet arrived, a compact cylinder with liquid cascading visibly through its transparent housing. Engineers who worked on it described the experience of watching the fluorinert waterfall through the clear tank as mesmerizing, a kind of technological aquarium. Only 27 Cray 2 systems were built, and they sold for between $12 and $17 million each. Most were delivered to the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and NASA. The machine was not the commercial triumph the Cray 1 had been, but its engineering was ahead of its time. 40 years later, immersion cooling became the standard approach for high-density data centers handling artificial intelligence workloads. The Cray 2 did it first. In 1991, Cray Research introduced the Cray C90, a direct descendant of Chen's XMP and YMP line, with sustained performance of 1 gigaflop per processor. The company chose Chen's evolutionary path over Seymour's radical one. But Seymour had already moved on. He was in Colorado Springs, working on something made of a material that almost no one in the industry believed could work at scale. And the company that bore his name was about to discover that dominance, even total dominance, does not protect you from a world that is changing underneath your feet. In 1989, Cray Research made the decision to separate itself from its founder. Seymour Cray's next project, the Cray 3, would use gallium arsenide semiconductors instead of silicon. Gallium arsenide could switch faster, consume less power, and run cooler, but it was expensive, fragile, and unproven at scale. The company could not afford to fund both the Cray 3 and the C90 product line that was keeping the lights on. So Cray Research spun off the Cray 3 project into a new entity, Cray Computer Corporation, headquartered in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with Seymour Cray as its chairman and chief designer. The company that bore his name kept the revenue. The man who gave it that name kept the risk. The Cray 3 was designed around hundreds of custom gallium arsenide integrated circuits packed into a processor the size of a single cubic foot. The design goal was 16 gigaflops, roughly 12 times the performance of the Cray 2. But the world that had once lined up to buy Seymour Cray's machines was changing in ways that no amount of clock speed could address. The Cold War was ending. The Berlin Wall fell in November of 1989, the same year Cray Computer Corporation was incorporated. Defense budgets, which had underwritten the supercomputer industry since the 1950s, began to contract. The national laboratories that had been Cray's most reliable customers were facing budget cuts and political scrutiny. At the same time, a new approach to high-performance computing was emerging. Massively parallel processing used thousands of cheap, commercially available microprocessors working together instead of a single handcrafted vector engine. The machines were less elegant. They were also far cheaper, and for a growing number of applications, they were fast enough. Companies like Thinking Machines and Intel were building parallel systems that cost a fraction of what a Cray cost, and the performance gap was narrowing with each generation of commodity chips. You can read that decision two ways. The vector architecture was superior for certain workloads, and Seymour knew it. The parallel approach was good enough for the rest, and the market knew it. Honest history holds both readings at once. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory had been the launch customer for the Cray 3. In 1991, Livermore canceled its order. The reasons were partly budgetary and partly technical. The machine had not met its demonstration deadline, and Livermore's scientists were beginning to explore parallel alternatives. Other potential buyers watched the cancellation and stepped back. Cray Computer Corporation built 4 prototype Cray 3 systems. One was delivered to the National Center for Atmospheric Research in 1993, a 4-processor machine nicknamed Grey Wolf. It was the only Cray 3 ever placed outside the company. Its clock ran at 480 megahertz, the fastest of any supercomputer then in existence. But the market for a machine that cost more than any parallel cluster and required gallium arsenide fabrication simply did not exist in sufficient numbers. Meanwhile, Steve Chen had left Cray Research in September of 1987 after the company dropped his parallel processor line in favor of the C90. IBM backed Chen's new company, Supercomputer Systems Incorporated, which burned through roughly $150 million developing a machine that was nearly completed but never delivered. The supercomputer industry was consuming its own talent. On March 24, 1995, Cray Computer Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Its assets totaled approximately $22.9 million against debts of $18.8 million. The Cray 4, a successor that was supposed to run at 1 GHz and outperform every parallel machine on raw speed, had cost an estimated $360 million to develop. It never found a single buyer. 400 employees in Colorado Springs lost their jobs. Grey Wolf was decommissioned the day after the filing and returned to the Colorado Springs facility. An engineer who worked on the Cray 4 later said that if the company had stayed in business another month or so, they would have sold and shipped a couple of units, and things would have turned out very differently. That is the kind of sentence that stays with you. Seymour Cray did not stop. In August of 1996, at the age of 70, he opened SRC Computers in Colorado Springs with 5 employees. The mission statement was simple: build computers. He was already thinking about a new architecture, one that would combine custom processors with reconfigurable logic. He had been building the world's fastest machines for nearly 4 decades. He had no intention of doing anything else. 6 weeks later, on September 22, 1996, Seymour Cray was driving his Jeep Cherokee on Interstate 25 near the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. A 33-year-old driver in a Chevrolet Camaro attempted to pass another vehicle, lost control, and struck a car that was then pushed into Cray's Jeep. The Cherokee rolled 3 times. Seymour sustained a broken neck, severe head injuries, and fractured ribs. He was transported to Penrose Hospital in critical condition and underwent surgery to relieve brain swelling. He never regained consciousness. Seymour Roger Cray died at 2:53 in the morning on October 5, 1996. He was 71 years old. He left behind 2 daughters, Susan and Carolyn, a son, Stephen, a sister, Carol, and 5 grandchildren. Larry Smarr, director of the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, said what the industry already knew. There wouldn't really be a supercomputer industry as we know it except for Seymour Cray. The company he had founded 24 years earlier did not survive him in its original form. In February of 1996, just months before Seymour's death, Silicon Graphics acquired Cray Research for approximately $740 million. The deal was supposed to merge SGI's strength in graphics and visualization with Cray's dominance in high-performance computing. It did not work. Silicon Graphics had been valued at over $7 billion at its mid-1990s peak, but the company failed to adapt as the industry shifted from expensive proprietary workstations to cheaper alternatives built on commodity hardware. By 2001, SGI reported a net loss of $115 million on revenue of $647 million. The Cray assets, the engineering teams, the product lines, the name itself had become a burden. In March of 2000, SGI sold the Cray Research business unit to Terra Computer Company, a small Seattle-based firm, for less than $100 million. Terra renamed itself Cray Inc., a business that Silicon Graphics had bought for $740 million changed hands 4 years later at a fraction of the price. The name, though, refused to die. Cray Inc., rebuilt under new management with annual revenues of roughly $200 million and about 900 employees, continued to develop supercomputers. The company abandoned the vector-only architecture that Seymour had championed and embraced the parallel designs that had undermined the old business. It built machines using commodity processors from AMD and Intel, connected by custom high-speed interconnects that were the true descendants of Seymour's obsession with minimizing wire length. The company carved out a position in the exascale computing race, building machines for national laboratories, intelligence agencies, and research institutions. On May 17, 2019, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise announced it would acquire Cray Inc. for $35 per share in cash, a transaction valued at approximately $1.4 billion. The deal closed on September 25, 2019. The Cray name became a subsidiary of HPE, and Peter Ungaro, Cray's president and CEO, joined HPE to lead its high-performance computing and artificial intelligence business unit. As of June 2025, Cray supercomputer systems hold the top 3 positions on the top 500 list, the global ranking of the fastest supercomputers in the world. The machines are different now. They are massively parallel, built from hundreds of thousands of commodity processors, cooled by systems that would make Seymour Cray's Floriner tank look quaint. But the name on them is still Cray. The irony is quiet and total. The architecture Seymour rejected is the one that carries his name into the future. In Chippewa Falls, parts for Cray systems are still manufactured in the same Wisconsin town where Seymour was born 100 years ago. Cray 1 systems sit in the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park in England, and the Swedish Museum of Science and Technology in Stockholm. Fewer than 20 Cray 1 units survive today. In September of 2024, Christie's auction house in New York sold a Cray 1 from the collection of Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen for $1,020,000. The pre-sale estimate had been $200,000 to $300,000. 2 phone bidders fought for 10 minutes. It was the highest price ever paid for a computer at auction. The machine that Cray Research expected to sell a dozen of, priced between $5 and $8 million in 1976, is now worth more as an artifact than most modern servers cost new. That is not marketing. That is the verdict of the people who used them. And then there is the coin. In April of 2026, the United States Mint released the Wisconsin American Innovation Dollar, the 30th issue, in its multi-year series honoring inventions from each state. The reverse design features a stylized aerial view of the Cray 1 supercomputer, the C-shaped tower seen from above, the curve of the bench visible even at the scale of a coin. The inscriptions read United States of America, Wisconsin, and Cray 1 supercomputer. Governor Tony Evers said that Seymour Cray represents the best of our state. The Cray 1 is the only supercomputer on American currency. 50 years earlier, visitors at Los Alamos sat on that bench, without knowing what was underneath the cushions. Now, the bench is pressed into metal, legal tender, $1, and it fits in the palm of your hand. Seymour Cray built the fastest machines on Earth, but speed alone could not outrun the market that no longer needed a single genius to build them. He designed the CDC 6600, the CDC 7600, the Cray 1, the Cray 2, the Cray 3, and he was working on the next one when he died. Lester Davis built every machine beside him and never became famous. Steve Chen designed the XMP and the YMP, the machines that kept the company alive and left before the golden age ended. The company was sold again, renamed, and sold a third time. The name survived because the machines were that good, and the people who used them never forgot. If you ever worked on a Cray, programmed one, or stood next to one and felt the heat radiating from behind those vinyl cushions, tell us in the comments the model, the year, and whether the machine still ran when you left. The people who used these supercomputers and the engineers who built them know more about what was lost than the people who sold them. Subscribe to Tech District. We have the story of another American empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.